Okay, can everyone hear me? Good evening, everybody. And my name is Simon Reddy from the Pew Charitable Trusts, and I'd like to welcome you to this side event on integrated politics for ocean climate action. And I'd also like to thank the International Alliance to Combat Ocean Acidification for hosting and organising this event. We all know that if we want to combat climate change, we need to reduce emissions. And rightly, that is what the UNFCCC has been focused on for the last 2 to 3 decades. But what I find very refreshing at the moment is that at the Blue COP in Madrid and also here in Glasgow, we're starting to have the dialogue, the important dialogue about the ocean climate nexus. The crucial role that oceans has played to date in supporting us through the initial impacts of climate change, but also the opportunities for developing and scaling ocean action. Ocean renewables, for instance, such as wind and wave. I don't know whether any of you know, but the UK has nearly 11 gigawatts of installed offshore wind capacity, the largest in the world. And also, very proudly, Scotland is a world leader in wave and tidal energy. In addition to that, we have nature-based solutions, such as blue carbon, which I'll just touch on briefly in a minute, and of course, marine conservation and management, and the opportunity to create large-scale marine protected areas. The Pew Charitable Trust has a long history of working on marine issues. In the US, we work on blue carbon in Oregon, North Carolina, and in California. And internationally, I lead a team in partnership with the Seychelles, Belize, and Costa Rica, working on seagrass and mangrove. And we have supported these countries in including these habitats in their NDCs. We believe that the US can play a key role in this space by its own actions domestically and internationally by supporting states and countries to advance blue carbon initiatives. And with that in mind, I would like to introduce the first speaker, Dr. Libby Jewett, who is the Director of Noaa's Ocean Acidification Program. Libby, over to you.
We'll switch it out. So in response to the challenge on blue carbon, I would like to say that President Biden announced last week $3 billion in adaptation finance by 2024 for developing countries, which in my opinion should be directed in some cases towards blue carbon. I have the great honor to be representing the federal government here, and so I wanted to touch on some of the initiatives that will be happening with our new administration. And right now in the US, we have a renewed focus on climate change. We're working, I can tell you as a federal government official, hard and as fast as we can, even though it isn't hard or fast enough compared to the climate crisis at hand. In January 2021, Biden signed the executive order on tackling the climate crisis, and some of the high-level activities in that are, one is our approach to taking a government-wide approach to the climate crisis, which includes reducing climate pollution, increasing resilience to impacts of climate change, protecting public health, conserving lands, water, and biodiversity, delivering economic justice, creating well-paying jobs and economic growth through innovation and deployment of clean energy technology and infrastructure, through robust and active engagement with stakeholders, including state, local, and tribal governments, from whom we'll be hearing shortly, fishermen, farmers, and regional councils. We do have an increased ambition on renewable energy. We are developing federal climate action plans to improve adaptation and increase resilience. We'll be talking about coastal resilience today. We are focused on the conservation of public lands, including coastal ecosystems, including wetlands, seagrasses, coral and oyster reefs, mangroves, and kelp forests, to name a few. We are creating a civilian climate corps to mobilize the next generation of conservation and resilience workers. Very excited about that. And of course, the 30 by 30, one of the many 30 by 30 goals conserve 30% of our lands and waters by 2030, again in consultation with our state, local, and tribal officials. And finally, I will say, from my position as the head of ocean acidification activities in Noaa, the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, we are committed to continuing to lead the U.S. and global response to ocean acidification in the following important ways: expansion of ocean and coastal OBS of OA nationally and internationally, research into the impacts on marine ecosystems, including the very important fish and shellfish on which our coastal communities rely, contributions to national and global assessments like the Internet IPCC, to which the COP is looking. We have many, many Noaa scientists and other scientists whom we support, whom contribute to Working Group 1 report, which you've probably heard about, and Working Group 2 and 3. We are doing scientific capacity building around the world, and there were announcements earlier today about a regional training center in Fiji. And finally, we will continue to lead global networks to enhance the sharing of information from the U.S. across the world, and very excited to share that. So I think that's okay.
All right. Great. Well, thank you, Libby, for being here today, and thank you for all of your leadership at Noaa's Ocean Acidification Program, which is a great segue to telling you a little bit more about the OA Alliance. So my name is Jessie Turner, and I'm the Secretariat for the International Alliance to Combat Ocean Acidification, an initiative that was launched in 2016 by the 3 West Coast governments here of Washington State, the state of Oregon, the state of California, and the province of British Columbia in Canada, in direct response to some of the first ever observed impacts of ocean acidification on oyster hatchery production across the North American West Coast. And it was really because of these early impacts that these subnational leaders laid the foundation for the OA Alliance to seek engagement with other governments around the world to raise ambition for taking clear and immediate action on to combat ocean and climate change. And I am really so proud that all of the states that are with us here today for the event have all created OA action plans as called for by the OA Alliance. And OA action plans seek to integrate and guide state actions and investments across programs and departments. They help further advance climate mitigation efforts, create a more holistic risk assessment, and really help provide more comprehensive response strategies. And here at COP, state members of the OA Alliance are releasing a special issue focused on strengthening OA policy and management, which you can learn more about here on your way out. And we are also calling on the federal government to create an OA action plan. And next, it is really my great privilege to introduce the next 2 speakers who are really true climate ocean leaders and champions that have pushed this work forward at the state, the regional, and the international level, and together remain on the absolute forefront of increasing ambition for climate action, integrating ocean into climate policy, and increasing effective management of our estuaries and shorelines in the context of climate change. So with that, it is my great honor to introduce my governor, Governor Jay Inslee of Washington State.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate a chance to talk about this because this is the evil twin of climate change and people don't understand it yet. And one point I want to make is people get climate change now, at least nationally, certainly in my state. They don't get ocean acidification yet. They don't see it. It's invisible. They don't put pH strips in the ocean very often. And I point this out because I think we've got part of our work plan has to be educating people on this. I'm not sure we have to educate people about, about forest fires and floods. We do need to educate people about ocean acidification. I think that needs to be part of our effort. Quick story. I was invited to a dinner with a Stanford oceanographer in early about 2000, 2001. And at the time, I thought it was wonderful that the oceans absorbed carbon dioxide. I thought it was a blessing because it got it out of the atmosphere so it wouldn't hurt our temperature. So I go to the basement of the Capitol, and here's this guy, I'd never met him before. His name Ken Caldera, a Stanford oceanographer. And he tells us that maybe that's not so good since it's changing the pH of the ocean. And when I heard that, it was like a bomb dropped. Because even in my mind, I understood the consequences of that, of potentially changing the whole food chain in the ocean, upon which about 18% of our protein depends for humans and all of our protein for salmon and orca. And it was just such a stunning moment of revelation on a negative side, and I've lived with that moment ever since. Now jump forward 20 years, I'm governor of the state of Washington, and what is happening? We cannot grow baby oysters in Puget Sound because of the acidity right now. We have to grow them in tanks where we treat it with bicarbonate of soda to change the pH to a more manageable level. And some of the nurseries have moved to Hawaii where there's a little less acidification. The consequences of this are so dire, it demands a response. Now obviously keeping carbon out of the atmosphere is something we are all concentrating on. But my comments want to be as potential local responses to this. And I really appreciate what Noaa is doing in partnership with our state, first on the research. We have got to do even basic research on this. There is so much we don't know about this phenomena, particularly on local issues, because it changes so much from cove to cove that, number one, we just need massive increased research in this area. Number two, we've got to make sure that we address nutrients, because the nutrient loading of our bays and coves just really aggravates this situation. And so when we think ocean acidification, we have to think terrestrially as well as aquatically to figure out our approach. We're doing that, but there's so many other things we got to do to keep nutrients out of the water, including from unexpected sources. We have found that one of the greatest nutrient polluters, if you will, in Hood Canal, where we've had this deoxygenation phenomena, is alder trees, which are nitrogen fixers, which then allow nitrogen to get into the water, the soil, and it leaches down in. So I never expected that trees could be a source of this problem. Anyway, we've got to think terrestrially as well. And third, we've got to help industry respond to this. They need some innovation help to see how the shellfish industry can grapple with this issue. That includes identifying species of mussels and oysters that can accommodate this. That is going on, but there's a lot more that we need to do. So this is a big ticket item when it comes to a COP, and it's a big ticket item for us. We're responding to it by doing everything we can to keep carbon out of the air, but we've got to respond to it on a more local basis as well. And I'm glad to join you in this discussion. Okay.
Thank you, Governor Inslee, and we are incredibly grateful for your leadership. Many years ago, in the early 1900s, a very famous Oregon governor signed a bill into law that essentially created a public highway along the Oregon coast. And that's how it existed for decades, until another famous Oregon governor came along and signed a bill ensuring that the entire Oregon public coast would be accessible to every single Oregonian. And so for us, while we are not an island state, the coast is very important to who we are as a people. We have 362 miles of publicly accessible coastlines. So we enjoy the beauty and bounty of that coastline. It is incredibly financially lucrative for tourism, not only for other Washingtonians to come down from Washington to enjoy the coastline, but other Americans, and frankly from around the world because of its accessibility. But the other piece is our coastal communities, our rural, historically underserved communities, rely on the coast, rely on the ocean for the produce that it provides, for the amazing, iconic crab that is so tasty when you crack it open and eat it like a snack, or the salmon which is such an iconic species to the Pacific Northwest. And the challenges that we are seeing, as Governor Inslee so clearly articulated, is that these species, we are losing these species due to the changes in ocean, both temperature and acidification, and of course oxygen depletion. So it's incredibly important as we move forward that we integrate oceans into our climate plans. I know that for Oregonians, it is important culturally, it is important economically, and is important environmentally. And I'm so pleased that Oregon has joined the OA Alliance, but that's not enough. We need our federal government to jump in and participate with every opportunity and every tool that it has, and develop an ocean plan. We have a moral imperative here. I want, in the next 100 years, for Oregonians to be able to enjoy our coast, our iconic and stunning coast. I want our rural communities along the coastline to continue to be able to fish and crab and enjoy Washington oysters, because they grow them better than we do. And I want to make sure that we all, whether in the United States or across the world, can enjoy the beauty and bounty that the oceans can provide. And we must move forward, and we must take action now. So let's do it. Let's make it happen. Let's make sure that we bring our federal partners along to help us in this effort, because we can't do it alone. And we're going to need, obviously, all of the states to join in this effort, and frankly, all of the countries across the world. So let's make it happen. Thank you.
Thank you both so much. Governors, I couldn't have said it better myself. It's almost like you both launched an international initiative to bring more governments into a discussion around ocean acidification. So I have one follow-up question for you each before we'll do a little panel shift here. So Governor Inslee, Washington was really the first to have a comprehensive ocean acidification action plan, and has since been a leading actor in linking climate and ocean science to action at the local level. And we're here at COP, right? So we've got this big international discussion, and we're talking about these big international frameworks. But can you tell us a little bit more why it's so important to take that data and information and translate it into local concrete action? And with that, do you have a call to action for other states, but other national governments here that are, yes, engaging internationally, but also looking domestically?
Well, yes, my call to action is join the Oceans Coalition that we have formed. We have 100 governments right now, both nations and states. Obviously, we'd like our federal government to join us as well. And, you know, so join us, because everybody's connected to the ocean, right? Everybody gets protein from the ocean, even if they're not a coastal state. And everybody is emotionally connected to the ocean. In my state, it's the orca. We are so emotionally connected to the orca. I remember the day I was out in a rowboat and I was 5 and it was really foggy. And all of a sudden I heard this sound. I was out fishing with my dad and it was really foggy and we couldn't see anything. And I heard this whoosh, whoosh. I asked my dad, what is that? And he goes, I don't know, but it might be a whale. It might be a killer whale. And man, when you're 5 years old and you hear about a killer whale, and all of a sudden you see this big black 6-foot-high fin going around our little rowboat, I've been emotionally connected to orcas for a long, long time. But they are so threatened by ocean acidification because it has the capacity of changing the whole bottom of the food chain upon which the salmon depend, upon which the orca depend. Our orcas are very much endangered right now. So this is an emotional connection, even if you don't live right on the beach like Kate and I do. So I would ask everybody here to try to encourage other folks to join this effort. The second part of your question is, why is this a local effort? Well, obviously it takes a global solution to keep carbon out of the water, but everybody has, at least those on the water, has some local impact of things we can work on. I mentioned several of them. Terrestrially, keep nitrogen and fertilizer from going into your cove, because that accelerates and exacerbates this problem. It means taking care of your riparian effort or environments to keep trees along your rivers, so you shade the rivers so you keep them cool, right? That obviously water temperature is a big part of this as well, because we're losing salmon just to temperature. So they're getting hit in both ways. So both in acidification, changing their food supply, and they're getting hit by temperatures that were so hot last year. We had about 2,000 steelhead die just for temperature. I've talked to some of the tribal fisheries in the Nooksack where they're not seeing salmon, won't go upstream to spawn because it's too hot. They get a half mile upstream, they stop. So all of these terrestrial and local are things that we can help on. The trying to bring back our bull kelp beds and like as well. Some of these efforts, which are also a carbon fixer to sequester, we're trying to see if we can sequester carbon in seaweed and bull kelp too. So anyway, lots of local things that we can do.
Thank you so much, Governor. And I have a different question for you,
Oh,
Governor
no.
Brown.
I'd plan to answer that question. Go ahead, it's fine.
You can make a local call to action. You also are an international leader on local action on ocean acidification and hypoxia. But my question to you, and you can wrap it in, I just want to bring us back to, of course, we are not forgetting, but we are continuing to be in the middle of and address an ongoing health, social justice, racial justice, and economic crisis that has been accelerated by the COVID-19 pandemic and exposed us to so many vulnerabilities, but as well as the important role that government plays in our lives. And so as we really think about going forward with a holistic approach to policy, I wanted to get your thoughts on how do we ensure that climate and ocean action is understood as essential for helping us address the inequities that persist across our civic lives and better achieve community resiliency. And you touched on that a little bit, but I'd love to hear you say a little more.
Sure. So what is really clear, and I think what the pandemic revealed to a lot of people across the globe, these climate events are disproportionately impacting our historically underserved communities of color, our low-income communities, and our indigenous communities, and our rural communities. And I think moving forward, it is absolutely essential that we center the voices of Black, Brown, and indigenous community members in our climate change work. And that can look any different ways. In Oregon, we have incredibly strong partnerships with our 9 federally recognized tribes, and we have strong government-to-government relationships with them. And I think that is absolutely key to moving the work forward. I created a racial justice council to center the voices of BIPOC communities in both my legislative agenda and our budget. And literally, the RJC is crafting the governor's legislative agenda. That it is no longer my agenda, it is the RJC agenda, and that's how it ought to be. And we're doing the same thing in our budget work. But it also involves people, right? It's important that there is a diversity of perspectives at the leadership table, regardless of whether we're dealing with ocean acidification or criminal justice reform. And so as we are working to advance racial justice issues, we need to make sure that our leadership, both at the state level and in charge of agencies, reflects the diversities of communities that we serve. We need to make sure that our workforce reflects that same diversity. And more importantly, and we're seeing that at least in the Oregon legislature, and I think in Washington as well, and I know in California, that our elected leadership must very much reflect the changing faces of the Pacific Northwest. And we know that when we have a diversity of voices at the leadership table, that the policies we develop are more resilient, more reflective, and more respectful of the communities that we serve, and so we'll be much more successful. In terms of specifics, in terms of ocean policy, a couple of quick things that we are working on. Number one, I fought, along with a number of the Southern Oregon coastal tribes, to keep the Elliott Forest in public hands. It's roughly 80,000 acres on the south coast, but 30% of the coastal coho come off of the Elliott. So it's so important that we preserve this forest and keep it in public ownership. In the late 2000s, we created marine reserves. We worked with the tribes. We worked with fishermen and fisherwomen on the coast to create marine reserves. It has substantially increased the biodiversity in those regions and those locations. So it's really, truly a win for the environment and a win for the communities that they're located in. And then lastly, in partnering with our tribes, we have worked to make sure that they have access and promote their first foods. And one of the ways we do that is education and information, both in our education system, in our schools, making sure that we are promoting an Indian, a Native American, and Indigenous curriculum. And we have worked with the 9 federally recognized tribes to develop those curriculum locally so that our school kids will have better knowledge and information and understanding about our Indigenous people. And then lastly, dam removal. And Governor Inslee did not mention one of the most successful dam removal programs they have had in the state of Washington on the Olympic Peninsula, and that was the Elwha. And that has been a huge boon for the tribal people there, but for the salmon as well, and I would say for the environment. And I am working, damn it, as hard as I can to make sure that we move forward on dam removal on in the Klamath Basin. We're going to continue to need our federal partnership to be strong to ensure that that happens. But we know there are 3 tribal communities that are incredibly dependent upon not just the salmon, but other indigenous species, the COP2 and the Quam suckerfish. So this is so important that we work together and that we continue to center the voices of our historically underserved communities of color and indigenous people.
Great. Right. Well, thank you, panel 1, so much, and thank you, Governors Inslee and Governor Brown. I am so proud to be a Pacific Northwesterner here at COP26, and really appreciate your leadership and look forward to working post COP26, and on we go. So, for everyone in the room, I would just like to beg a little bit of forgiveness. What I'd like to do is call panel 2 to stand with panel 1 and get one quick picture really quick, and then we'll do a little chair shift if that's all right.
With 2 microphones.
Hi. I went to Oregon State, so
Oh, yay, go
my
Beavers.
second pseudo home.
Okay. Do you want tall people down in front? And we can get behind you? Do you want us to get closer? Okay, all right, get in closer.
Someone else get this. I buzzed in. Great. Thank you. Okay. Great. So thank you all so much. And now I'd like to call up panel 2. Great. There we go. Great. Now I'd like to call up panel 2. So please don't go anywhere. Stick around and introduce to the stage my friend and colleague Anna Marie Laura, Director of Climate Policy at the Ocean Conservancy.
Thank you, Jesse.
For some reason, I ended up with 2
Great.
No, panel 2.
Let's take a seat.
Okay. Thanks, Jesse. So, as she mentioned, I'm Anna Marie Laura. I'm the Director of Climate Policy at Ocean Conservancy. We are working to support and enable ocean-based climate solutions, both for mitigation and adaptation. And this is really exciting. We're here at COP while a global climate agreement is being negotiated as we speak. We have national governments like the U.S. stepping up and making plans and setting goals, and then we have states where the real action is taking place. You know, every state is different. they're all unique in geography and their socioeconomics and in their politics. And so states are really laboratories for a lot of different kinds of solutions to a lot of different challenges. And some of the ocean-based climate solutions, in case that's a new term to you, we consider things like climate resilience by restoring wetlands and mangroves, improving the resilience of coastal communities, also their potential to store blue carbon, renewable energy in the offshore environment, wastewater and stormwater infrastructure investments to curb pollution, and of course creation of ocean acidification plans and many other types of solutions. So really we're here today to hear from a great range of panelists from all across the country. Let me just quickly introduce them and then we'll jump into a few questions. So we have Secretary of Natural Resources from California, Wade Crowfoot, whose priorities include building California's resilience to climate threats. We have Secretary Grumbles from Maryland, who's been the Secretary of Environment since 2015. He chairs the Chesapeake Bay Cabinet and Maryland Climate Change Commission. Then we have Senator Lee from Hawaii, who's been in the state legislature since 2008. He's led initiatives at the state level on clean energy, adaptation, and transit. And then Chair Case, Suzanne Case, who is born and raised in Hilo, Hawaii. She had a long tenure at TNC, including as its executive director before the role she currently has. So Secretary Crowfoot, can we start with you? States are, of course, on the front lines experiencing impacts of climate change and leading the charge to set emissions reductions targets, advance renewable energy portfolios, et cetera. Can you just tell us a little bit more about the importance of including ocean climate solutions as part of the broader climate mitigation and adaptation strategies we've heard discussed this week at COP?
Sure thing. It's an honor to be sitting with you and to hear our governors. We heard from, listen, I think wherever you live in the world, if you are part of a subnational or supranational, as Governor Inslee calls it, of a province or a state or a country, and you have coastline on an ocean, that is fundamentally what defines our identity, right? I mean, this is critical to who we are as island nations, as coastal states or provinces. The challenge is, much like the atmosphere is a commons, and we're dealing with a fundamental crisis of a tragedy of the commons where we have collectively polluted something that nobody took responsibility for a long time. The ocean is in many ways the same way. It's something that we share, but it's very difficult to impact change in the ocean on our own. So for us, the partnership, the collaboration that we have with other states and importantly other nations is absolutely critical. We have to come together to actually understand what's happening in our ocean and then take whatever actions we can to address it. And so we're learning in California from our neighbors, our partners, and we're hopefully sharing experiences that we have as well. 1,100 miles of coastline. We're sleeves rolled up, putting in those nature-based solutions, trying to restore our coastal wetlands, working with Governor Brown to remove 220 miles of obsolete dams on the Klamath River Basin to bring back one of the largest salmon fisheries on the West Coast, thanks to the leadership of tribal nations. Working on maintaining and potentially modifying or expanding our marine protected areas at the state, which complements these national marine sanctuaries. So from my perspective, while we continue to need to learn what's happening in the ocean and what we can do to affect it, I think all of our states are taking actions now, because simply it's not optional. Again, our identities, our economies, our people are intertwined with our coasts and our oceans, and that's why we feel the need to act. I guess last point is I'd acknowledge leadership that actually is represented not on this panel, but really across the COP, and that is indigenous leadership. At the last COP when I was in Madrid, I came there very proud of our marine protected area network, 126 underwater parks. And I served on a panel with representatives from island nations that educated me that those marine protected areas, that concept has been exercised in those island nations for thousands of years. And it's such a sophisticated system that they have different names in those native languages for different types of MPAs, seasonal closures, geographic closures, and it was a real humbling moment. And then lastly, I'd say the island nations that used to be called small island states, but are being called large island or large ocean nations, who have really sounded the call for ocean health. So I think, I certainly, from sitting from where I do in California, learn a ton from not only our partners in the United States, but from all these leaders across the world.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for emphasizing that point of learning from each other, at many levels, learning from each other. Secretary Grumbles, moving over to you. Obviously, Maryland is a coastal state in Chesapeake Bay. It's very clear that ocean and coastal bay health are essential to the state economically and culturally. Can you tell us any more about specific initiatives and policies that are integrating both climate action and ocean action and management strategies and approaches that you think are the most effective at a local level?
Yes, I can.
Wonderful.
Thank you. On behalf of Governor Larry Hogan, let me just say the importance of bipartisan climate leadership, whether it's the mountains or the coasts or the ocean, are more critical and important than ever. And so it's a real honor to be part of this panel and to be part of the Ocean Acidification Alliance and other collaborative efforts that recognize we have to be focusing in, for us in Maryland, since you nailed it, the Bay is the heart and soul. Over 90% of the state drains into the Chesapeake Bay. The river meet the sea. I mean, the connection between the Bay and the coastal bays and our Atlantic coast shoreline is so important to our economy and our quality of life. And so what it means for us in Maryland is stepping up, not only focusing on greenhouse gas reduction, because we don't want our coastal bays and Chesapeake Bay to be carbon sinks for the rest of the world. What we want is to dramatically reduce the greenhouse gas emissions around the region and in our own state, and couple that with a dramatic commitment to submerged aquatic vegetation, to living shorelines, to blue carbon initiatives, to greening and using nature-based solutions to reduce the runoff, not just from the atmosphere, but from the land. And then just the last point in terms of the connection between climate and ocean is we are very focused on understanding the science of ocean chemistry and bay chemistry, not just the temperature, but the acidification challenges. The only thing scarier than erosion is corrosion. And losing our precious natural resources. We have $33 billion for sure that are brought into the region through the health of the Chesapeake and coastal bays. And so we're very focused in a selfish but enlightened way about ocean health and connecting it to our greenhouse gas mitigation and adaptation and resiliency efforts. And science and advocacy are at the heart of it.
Thank you. I couldn't agree more. Senator Lee, you've been in the state legislature since 2008. You're the only state senator here on the panel. Can you tell us a little bit about what states can uniquely do well that the federal government or even executive offices at the state level can't do?
Well, I think it's safe to say for all of us that sometimes the federal government doesn't move as fast as we hope it would on various issues. I think right now, this is one of those issues. And you have 50 states in the United States, each one unique with its own geography, its own issues, its own political climate, and that means there's 50 different opportunities to do what the federal government cannot. And collaborating, I think like the secretaries had mentioned, between states is so critically important and so powerful. We have trade groups of states. One which is here is called the National Caucus of Environmental Legislators. It's 1,200 legislators, Republican, Democrat, from all 50 states, working together on these issues in ways that take one great example somewhere in any state and spread that out so other states can do the same exact thing and set the bar high in enough places that it eventually forces the federal government to take action. And it's not just that, but I'll give you one quick example. You know, it's the opportunity individual states have to do things that even some other states cannot, and set the path. In Hawaii, one of the things that was so surprising In 2018, we passed a law that made us the first state to commit to a carbon negative future by 2045, economy-wide. That's the law. And we did it, surprisingly, unanimously. All Republicans, all Democrats at the table said, yes, we're going to do this. And when we passed it, we had the support of the Chamber of Commerce, of our utilities, of fossil fuel interests, transportation, agriculture, and others who were there at the press conference with us. And so it lays out this kind of possible future that others can certainly share. And we have a lot to learn ourselves from other states on the East Coast and in the Northwest and others. And that's something that I think is invaluable. And that's not something that you're going to see, I think, move as quickly at the federal level. But what we've done is now set the stage collectively on all these different issues, where states in the Northwest are leading, on the East Coast are leading, out in Hawaii are leading, and that's something we hope will translate to action at the national level and here at the international level.
Thank you. I just want to emphasize this point because really state action is what kept the U.S. in for the last several years, as we all know. So thank you all for the work that you've been doing at the state level. Chair Case, just, little Hawaii trend here, but obviously people in Hawaii are very connected to the ocean. They obviously see a lot of impacts of climate change happening already, and Hawaii is doing a lot of great work leading on big ocean policies like restoring coral reefs, like 30 by 30, and developing comprehensive ocean acidification action plan. So what should people understand about Hawaii's relationship to the ocean, and why is that relationship important to accelerating the actions we need to address climate change?
Thank you for that. Thank you so much for having us here. Yeah, islands are a great microcosm for our planet, and especially in this climate crisis, because we can see the whole picture. We call it Mauka to Makai, mountains to the sea. Every day, you look up, it's green, you look out, it's blue, and so we are deeply reliant on all parts of our island, and we have close communities. We know each other, we work together closely. And our coral reefs are the bedrock of our lifestyle. They create our beaches, they protect our shoreline, they provide habitat for our fish, they create our surf that we are so famous for. So without those reefs, we are, the corrosion of reefs would be devastating to Hawaii and other island communities. So we have worked to protect our reefs through a series of, you set goals, plans, and then action on the ground. And we have a 30 by 30 marine initiative that Governor Ige announced at the World Conservation Congress in Honolulu in 2016, and we're full on in the implementation of that. We have a coral reef restoration plan we have been working with Noaa on and the Nature Conservancy to put together. And we have an ocean acidification action plan, and that's the inspiration of the Ocean Acidification Alliance. And we know that climate change creates great threats to our ocean. So coral bleaching, ocean warming and coral bleaching events kill our corals, and if they don't have an opportunity to recover, they're taken over by algae and eventually die. We have fish species that we rely on to eat, lobster and opihi, the shellfish for Hawaii, the oysters and shellfish and urchins. We also have crustose coralline algae, which is actually a big carbon sink and helps create our sand. So all of these are very vulnerable to ocean acidification, and it is very little understood, even by experts and certainly by the general public, about what an insidious threat this part of climate change is. It's a tremendous threat to ocean communities because of this corrosive effect. And so the plan involves, number one, understanding that science better. Number two, taking action to reduce our carbon emissions. I mean, we can't solve our ocean problems without solving our climate problems. So that's a key part of our plan. We build adaptation into our systems, including, for instance, herbivore replenishment areas, so that in a coral bleaching event, the herbivores can keep that algae down until the corals have a chance to recover. And then, of course, increasing public understanding of ocean acidification and building international collaboration with all the ocean community dealing with this.
How about now? Cool. Okay. Well, now it's working. How about now? Okay. Thank you, Chair Case. I really appreciate that this idea of collaboration is being emphasized, at every level here, because that's what this is about. We're at a partnership here through the OA Alliance, and then other partnerships, voluntary and organic, are so critical. Secretary Crowfoot, I'm going to start with you and then open this up to the rest of the panel. So you all have mentioned solutions, you've mentioned actions that are happening at the state level. Obviously, financing these solutions is very important. Sometimes that is one of the most difficult places to integrate. We have coastal management funding, we have climate change funding, we have different departments in charge of these. How do you see the financing for some of these climate solutions being realized in your state, and what are some successes or some challenges that you guys have seen?
Well, I think we all recognize that investments on the front end prevent spending a lot more on the back end. The figure we always point out is there's a lot of research out there that suggests about $1 spent in adaptation or resilience saves about $6 on the back end. That's certainly true with wildfire and drought that we're dealing with, but also oceans as well. So we are investing what surplus we have. We had a significant surplus in this last budget in climate resilience, including coastal and ocean resilience. And our state leaders, including our governor, announced a month ago that they were investing this year $15 billion in climate action, about $8 billion of which is resilience-oriented, at least $1 billion of which is coastal and sea level rise resilience. We recognize that our economies rely on the coast in different ways, but and we recognize that this blue economy, whether it's tourism or fisheries, is critically important. So from our perspective, it's an investment in our continued economic prosperity. There's a lot of talk at the COP, here over the last several days about finance and the role of private finance in climate resilience or climate action. And, to be quite honest, we have not cracked open how to leverage private finance for environmental conservation, whether it's wetland conservation or expansion of the marine protected areas. But, from our perspective, again, investments are essential. I want to acknowledge, the best news I think our states have received in some time is, thanks to President Biden's leadership and congressional leadership, we have now real funding on infrastructure. And it's a little dizzying to understand how much funding is coming from the federal government, but I would bet that a significant amount of that funding is actually going to coastal resilience, and it'll find its way into the states. I agree that states in so many ways lead and maintain that consistency, but then when you do have a federal partner like the Biden-Harris administration and this Congress, then you're off and running. So a lot more work to do, but I think we can all recognize and we should celebrate each other's progress.
I would just say from a Maryland and regional perspective, Governor Hogan is putting a real emphasis on conservation finance, not as an alternative to public funding, whether it's at the state or federal or local level, but to dramatically boost the partnerships for coastal and bay health and raise the flag, the warning flag about how the science is increasingly telling us that if we don't invest in coastal resiliency with the living shorelines, the green infrastructure, the blue carbon strategies, we're heading towards a catastrophic event on the overall health of our oceans. So the $47 billion in the bipartisan infrastructure plan towards climate resiliency, a lot of it is land-based for sure, and states hope to be a leader in implementing those dollars wisely. And from a Maryland standpoint, connecting the dots and the drops between infrastructure and ocean and coastal health is going to be absolutely critical. So we can overcome that initial skepticism about, oh, you're putting too much money into something, or it's going to cost the regulated community too much up front, when we know that there is no alternative if you want a healthy ocean and planet to put these partnerships that involve conservation, finance, and accountability. Really boost those tremendously.
Yeah, I'll just say very quickly that I think to cut through the political debate around this, and I totally agree with the previous speakers, you know, the faster we realize that the longer we wait, the more expensive it's going to be. And more importantly, that we are already paying for all of this one way or another. And we really just got to think and wrap our heads, at least in elected office, around the idea that we're just changing the way we're spending money rather than trying to figure out what to do. That makes it politically possible to make these investments in a way that I think satisfies all the different political pressures and tug and everything that everyone's been feeling. And that's something that's exciting, because at the end of the day, there's only so much time we have. And I feel like this year, this COP, this everything, we've heard this discussion more than I think ever before. And that's a great thing, because it means that that political momentum is starting to really take off.
And I would just add that there's multiple layers of financing that you can use to do ocean restoration, including in the ocean, user fees, fisher license fees, visitor fees, but also on land, of course, investment in the infrastructure of wastewater treatment is an important one. In our case, sediment coming off the mountains into the ocean is a huge part of the problem. And to build resilience, you need to make sure that you're investing in forest conservation too, so that what's coming down the streams is the sediment is reduced, the water quality is better. So investing capital and operating money at all levels really will help the resilience of our reefs.
Thank you all for touching on that. So the first panel ended with a question of what they would ask from federal government, and I see a lot of civil society and NGO faces here, and I'm sure participating virtually. So my question to you all, the infrastructure bill, the Build Back Better Act, we hope is going to send a lot of resources, obviously at the state level. What is it that you all would like to see from civil society, from the nonprofits, national and local, to help make sure that these funds, get to the solutions that are being championed at the local level, that you all know you can support, and that have been identified and prioritized by you guys at the states?
Well, first of all, I'll be honest. We're only where we are in California, thanks to this community of non-governmental organizations pushing us to protect the oceans and coast. These groups were fundamental in us creating an Ocean Protection Council, and for example, just this last year, putting an extra $65 million in our budget specifically for coastal restoration. So one is continuing to push us and hold us accountable. Two is partnering with us and helping us build our scientific understanding. Our civil society partners, academic, research institutions, nonprofits, have incredible scientists that are doing really important work that's forming our decisions. And then the third is bring the creative ideas. I don't know about my governmental colleagues here, but I don't have a lot of time to be creative, in all honesty. And oftentimes the best ideas that we implement come from civil society. There are things like the so-called ropeless crab traps, our crab pots that are being piloted that are going to reduce whale entanglements, right? That's just one example that's come out of civil society working with fisheries. So look, I think that oftentimes, government will get the credit for doing something, but really the heroes are behind the scenes. Whether it's the women and men that are actually out there taking care of the resource in our state park system, our fish and wildlife, or even our fishers, or the NGOs. So huge thanks to all of the organizations that are really behind the work we're talking about tonight.
I would just like to add two components. One is acidification and the other one is aquaculture. I really see great opportunities for sustainability with federal the emphasis of the federal government really rallying with states playing leading roles in implementation. And I would just simply say, as one of the greatest models that I'm aware of in the history of U.S. environmental law has been the National Estuaries Program, where the Clean Water Act laid out a framework where national estuaries of significance, 28 of them, would be with NGOs and state and local government and federal support and scientific support, not just funding and regulatory support, would really focus in on sustainability and implement plans, comprehensive plans that were developed very closely with NGOs and businesses. And to put a real emphasis on that model and emphasizing climate-ready bays and estuaries, it doesn't get directly at the deep ocean concerns, but particularly from a state perspective, it's going to build tremendous land-based support for the bays and our coasts, our coastal bays, and integrate the climate strategies with NGOs, and everybody's invested in implementing those dollars that are going to continue to grow. They have to, with accountability too.
I think I'll add to all that and say, I gave this answer the other day too, when this issue came up. There are infinite number of priorities that politicians and governments and everybody has. And this is obviously, I think, one of the most important, but I'm one person and we got to convince a lot of other people of that too. And that brings us to this COP, where we have tens of thousands of people outside these doors marching, demanding action, demanding change, demanding progress. And I think the biggest story out of this whole thing is not going to be that there is some big national agreement, though we hope for an international agreement that solves all these problems. But I think it's really going to be these subnational actors in the United States and other countries taking these steps that are politically possible, that are feasible, and are boots on the ground, actionable, producing real results. And if that kind of desire for change and mobilization and organization going on right outside here can happen in each of our states, asking for the same kinds of things, put your money where your mouth is, invest in the right things, make a difference for ourselves and our kids, that is going to make more of a difference in our trajectory collectively than probably anything else. And I think that is the huge win that comes out of this year, because that will refocus everything on what's happening at the state level, at the provincial level, and empower our colleagues, no matter which state we're from, to actually turn that into not just a paycheck that's going to go to some particular cause, but actually real results that are meaningful. Hold us accountable. That's what this is all about.
And I would add to all of this discussion, the voice of the local communities. And they're so important because the people that are most closely intertwined with our coastal resources are, in Hawaii's case, our Native Hawaiian communities. Many of them are fisher groups, are local-based community groups that are creating community-based subsistence fishing areas, community-based managed areas, reinstituting traditional and customary practices that are much more protective of our marine resources. We have groups, whole networks across the state that are restoring fish ponds, the ancient Hawaiian fish ponds, and for really local aquaculture, for local consumption. We have limu networks, native Hawaiian, native algae. We have folks that are out planting algae, the limu out back onto the shoreline to harvest them. And all of these groups are again intimately connected with the ocean and collaborators with local governments, with state government, with the federal government. And so to solve this, we need a whole network that's working together well in partnership.
Great. Well, I can say that we've got our marching orders then. We will be in touch to hold you accountable, to create these networks and coalitions and support the action and leadership that you guys have been taking at the subnational level, which is really translated to national leadership for the United States. So thank you. Thank everybody for participating, from Ocean Conservancy, from Pew, from the OA Alliance. Great way to wrap up the first day of the second week of COP. Thank you.